Hey guys, so I got a lot of requests to do an inking tutorial, so that's what I'm doing here. And people specifically wanted to know what tools should they use, how do they know how to make the line art look good, how to make it not look shaky, where do you thicken the lines, that kind of thing. So most of this tutorial is going to focus on line weight. But I first wanted to mention some tools you can use because you have so many options and it really depends what medium you're using. There's all kinds of things here. So I use a lot of Copic markers for my art, and so I want to use a pen that is alcohol proof since they're alcohol based markers, and you really never know when you buy a pen if it's going to work or not, so it's a lot of trial and error or even research if you can find someone online who's reviewed a certain pen. But this is my go-to pen, just the normal Copic multiliner. I usually use size 0.3, but the label's rubbed off, so I'm showing a 0.5 for this video. 0.3 I think is the best multiliner size. I use it for 95% of my artwork, and I sometimes use a 0.1, but I will pretty much never grab this 0.5 to use it. I think 0.3 is the best, and if you're looking to get a second one, 0.1 is good. Same applies to these microns. These are pretty good as well. Let's see, what else do I have here? This one is a little Staedtler fine liner. It's actually the same as these guys pretty much. You can use a regular ballpoint pen. You could use this kind of pen. It's a liquid ink pen by Pilot. You could use dip pens. These are the kind you have to dip into ink, and I actually have a video about these and about different inks. So if you want to know more about these, I'll leave a link to that in the video description. It's a bit of an older video, but I think there's still some good information there. So let's just put these on the side. You can use different colored inks. So I have a set here of Staedtler fine liners, and these are pretty nice. And then you can also use pencils to outline your work. I just did that in my most recent video. I used a brown and really liked how it gave a soft look. This Copic multiliner is exact same as this one. It's just a refillable version. You can change a nib, replace ink cartridge, just a little bit more on the fancy side, but it's the same ink. And then there's also brush pens. Brush pens are really nice for getting different line weight, but I feel like mine are messed up. Like this one looks like the tip was cut off, like it's not even pointy. And then my other one, it's a little pointier. The nib looks a bit longer, but it's frayed at the tip. It's always been like that, so I don't know, maybe I just need to buy new tips for mine. But with a brush liner, you could press lighter for a thinner line and press harder for a thicker line, so that's an option as well. And you could even use just a paintbrush dipped in ink to ink your drawings. The possibilities are endless. No matter what you want to use as your tool, the tips I'm going to show you apply to any of these, no matter what you're using. I'm going to be using the multiliner, the Copic multiliner in mine, but no matter what tool you're using, these tips can help you. Okay, so let's say you have your sketch. Where do you go from there? You can ink directly onto the paper you drew it on, but I don't like to do that because I tend to get a heavy hand towards the end of my sketching process, and it can be really hard to erase all the pencil lines. Also, I just kind of like preserving the original sketch. I want to be able to flip through my sketchbook and see the original sketch. So I like to ink on a separate piece of paper. So my usual process is I'll sketch in my sketchbook or on a piece of spare paper I have lying around, and then I will trace onto my nice paper, whether that's my marker paper, watercolor paper, whatever I'm using. So here's a sketch. You have your other piece of paper you want to trace it onto. Where do you go from there? Well, I have a thing called a light box. I do not know what brand it is. It's unmarked and it was a gift. I do not know where it's from, but you can get these at art stores usually. It's easier to find them online. It's just a thin little box and you flip a switch and a light turns on. You can't really tell because I have so many lights surrounding me right now. And it's just a light and you put your artwork on it and you can trace it. But not everyone has one of these, and there's actually a simple solution to get around this. You can just take a plastic container, some kind of storage container if you have one. You could even pick one up at the store for pretty cheap. And then you need some kind of battery operated light. I'm thinking of those round ones, you just push them to turn them on, or any kind of light that would fit into the plastic container. And you can get really creative. For example, I have a set of drawers where I keep paper in. Just take the paper out, flip it upside down, put a light underneath it, bam, got your own light box. This one's not that clear though. Some of them are a little clearer. This one's a bit tall. Okay, I can't even show it in the video because it's so big. This one's a bit more clear, but it is a bit taller. So you can even just look for something around your house. If you have plastic drawers, just something, some kind of large plastic storage container with a flat surface, you can turn it into a light box by putting a lamp underneath it. So I have my sketchbook open so that there's only one sheet of paper so I can see through it easily. And then put my paper on top. And I like to secure it with a piece of tape. And what I use is this Scotch removable magic tape. The removable tape is a lot better than regular tape because it's not very sticky, and so you don't risk tearing your paper when you pull the tape off. And I actually reuse my strips too. I actually stick them to the underside of my desk so I can reuse them. So I'll just stick this down. Sometimes they have little bits of hair on them or something, but hey, saves you a bit of tape. Next, you're going to want to shut off any lamps around you because it's going to prevent you from being able to see through the light box, because the light coming underneath will be competing with the light coming from above and they'll cancel each other out and you won't be able to see anything. So, turn off my lamps, turn on my light box, and you can easily see through the paper and start inking. Now, you have some choices. You can go directly with your inking pen on top of it, or what I do most of the time, especially if my sketch is a little on the messier side, I actually take a pencil and trace neatly with pencil onto the new paper. So there's not going to be any kind of sketchy type movements here. I'm just doing one clean line, following everything that I've sketched down. Whether you're doing this with your ink or with your pencil, just do one simple line, no kind of thickness to your line in any spots, just something simple. And I'm not going to do this whole thing because that will take forever. This is just an example. Okay, let's just say that I lined the whole thing in pencil, and I'm going to turn my lights back on. Now that you have your beautifully traced picture, you can remove your tape, stick it under your desk if you want to reuse it. And if you already used your ink, you can skip this next part. But if you did in pencil like me, I then go back over with my ink, and again, it's one simple line. If this pen wants to work. There we go. I grabbed the wrong one. I grabbed the one that's got a split end. Hold on. There we go. So yeah, I just do one simple line across the whole thing, nothing fancy, and when you're done, it's gonna look like this. And if you used pencil underneath, you can go ahead and erase the pencil. Be sure not to crinkle your paper because that is the worst. So, you have your inked picture. Okay, cool, but it's not that great. There's something missing about it. And if you compare these two pictures, which one looks better? I hope you're saying this one. I guess it's up to opinion, but I'm sure most people would say this one looks nicer, and that's because I varied the line width. The lines are thicker in some spots, thinner in others, and I think it just adds more dimension and makes it look better. So I'm actually going to do a demo of how you get from this to this, but first I just want to show you some other ways you can ink your drawing, because you don't have to ink it so it looks like this. You can do other things with your inking as well. And again, this is no matter what medium you're using. I'm using multi-liners as the example, but if you want to use dip pens, you want to use a brush pen, whatever, this information applies to everyone. So I like to think of this one as the thin lines. There are some areas where it's thicker, but overall the lines are pretty thin. You can do the exact same thing with thicker lines and it gives it a different look. It's really up to you how you want to go. I think I usually fall somewhere in between here. This is closer to what I usually do, although it's a bit thinner than this. And depending on how small or large your picture is, it can affect how it looks. Like if you're doing a really small picture, the lines are going to look pretty thick, whereas if it's a larger picture, using the same pen, it'll look like you have thinner lines. So there's that too. So it's whatever you want to do. Then I have another option where there are thin lines within the picture and then it's outlined thicker. I usually do add somewhat of a thicker line to my pictures on the outside, but not to this extreme, and I don't always do it, but I think it's a nice way to make the character pop. So there's that. Another option is to leave gaps in your line art. I usually don't do this simply because I don't think to do it, but I think it gives a really nice illustrative style. So you can see here, the line's thicker, it tapers, and then there's a gap in the line. There's a gap here, gap there, pretty much anywhere where I think the light would hit or where there's a point, like a little apex, is where I just leave a gap. And where you want to leave gaps is totally up to you, but I think it makes for a pretty interesting style. Another option is to use a different color other than black. So this is same as the first one pretty much, except I used a sepia liner instead of black. And what's nice about this is it just makes the line less harsh, and once it's colored in, if you want to color it, you don't see the lines as much. They disappear a little more, which can add a really cool look to your picture. It's really up to what kind of style you're going for. Do you want bold line art? Do you want something that's a bit more subtle? So sepia is a really popular choice when people aren't using black. And if you want, you can incorporate more colors than just sepia. So here I outline different parts of the face depending on what color I'm going to color it in. So I use sepia for the actual face, I use pink for the lips, green for the hair if I'm going to make her hair green. I'm assuming I'm going to color the bow blue, so I outlined it in blue, and then just gray for this frilly thing because I assumed it would be white. And you can actually get more crazy than this. You can use as many colors as you want. One person that comes to mind is the YouTuber Limia Crescent. She actually used these types of pens here and did rainbow line art. So I'll link to that video in the video description if you want to see it. So let's say the hair is going to be green. She would outline it in all the colors. There'd be some red, some yellow, some blue, everything, and it's a pretty cool effect. So there's that option as well. So I hope this gives you guys some ideas of different styles you can go for. I'm going to do a demo on how to go from thin lines to weighted lines, so no line weight to line weight, and actually there's line weight in all of these, so it's not like I'm showing you how to do one of these. Really, I'm showing you what I'm teaching you applies to all of these. So let's get started with the demo. I just want to say that some tools actually allow you to vary the line weight while you're putting down your first layer of lines, like a brush pen or the dip pen, so the harder you press, the thicker the line gets. So you at this stage might already have varying line weight, but I thought that demonstrating it this way will help show you where to add the thickness. So I guess that is the one difference in techniques. If you're using those kinds of pens, you're adding the line thickness on your first pass. Whereas if you're using a multi-liner, you're probably adding line thickness on your second pass. So I have two general rules I follow. One is the outer silhouette of the character is going to be a little bit thicker, and also the undersides of objects are going to be a little bit thicker. I'm thinking of it in terms of assuming light sources are usually above the character, then the underside would have a bit of shadow, and that's where I'm going to thicken the line. So I tend to start on the jawline, and I thicken the cheeks and the chin. And this is probably the one point where I don't really follow my rule. Because my general rule, hold on, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me do a little diagram. My general rule is if there's some kind of T intersection, it doesn't have to be a 90-degree angle, but if two lines meet, I thicken the area where they meet, because it's most likely two separate objects, and they cast shadows on each other, and that's just where shadows accumulate. So I would thicken those areas. So keeping that in mind while you're inking, it would get thicker where they intersect and then taper off as you get farther away from that intersection. My other rule is, let's say there's some kind of apex, I would in general assume that the light is hitting that apex and leave that less thick. But sometimes I do the opposite and make it more thick. So the jawline is one of those exceptions, and the reason I've done it this way is because back when I read a lot of manga, that's how it was done. And it makes sense under the chin for it to be thicker because you are seeing that shadow under the jawline. So I think that's why you have this reverse rule for the jaw, is just that there's a lot of shadow underneath there. And you know how I mentioned in general I make the silhouette thicker than the rest? I also tend to make the jaw a lot thicker, as well as the area where the hair meets the head. Everyone's going to have their own way of doing it, but I'm just explaining the way I do it. I mean, that's all you can do with art, is everyone has their own way of doing everything, and no way is right or wrong. It's just, you know, I can only teach you what I know. I can't really teach you how everyone does it, because there's probably an infinite number of ways to do everything. So as you can see, the line is thickest here, and then it gets a bit thinner in between. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other cheek. And you'll notice I rotate my paper a lot, and that's because I feel more comfortable doing vertical lines. I find it a lot harder to go side to side with my lines, so I tend to rotate my paper so that I'm always drawing up and down. And then after I do the jawline, I typically do the neck next. So as you can see, there's a little T intersection here where the neck meets the chin. So I'm going to thicken the line, and it gets a bit thinner towards the bottom of the neck. Same on this side. We'll thicken it a little bit, taper it off as we go down. There is another T intersection here. You could thicken it there too, but I tend to not, just because, I mean, it does get a little bit thicker once I go across, but it's really weird. I have my little rules, but I don't necessarily follow them. I don't think it through that much when I'm inking. I just do it, you know, you draw the way you draw. But yeah, these are just kind of general rules that I tend to follow, but not always. So after I do the jawline, I do typically move to the hair next. I don't know why. This is just the way I do it for some reason. And I'm getting really thick where there's this little bump of hair, thinning out as I come down. Oh look, a T intersection. Let's thicken this a little bit, as well as this one. And another thing is, going back over the lines like this gives you a second chance to stabilize your lines. So if you look right up here, this line and this line, they're actually pretty squiggly. You could see my hand wasn't the most sturdy when I was inking that part of the drawing, and that's fine. You're not going to be perfectly smooth, and I think steadiness just comes with time and practice, but you're not always going to be 100% steady. Sometimes your lines are going to be a little squiggly, and that's why I like doing 2 passes. I have my first pass with no line weight, and then I go back over it. I can fix things as well as making it look better. And speaking of fixing things, sometimes I thicken a certain part of my line art simply because I screwed up and I'm just trying to fix it. So maybe I'm trying to thicken a line, or with my original line, I got a little off track, and so I thicken it just to try to smooth it out and make the mistake not so noticeable. You know, we all make mistakes, and especially with a traditional medium like this, you can't just hit the undo button or erase your ink or anything, so what you put down is what you get. I mean, if you were then bringing it into Photoshop or something, you could fix it up or use white ink, but if I'm going to be coloring this with markers after, I can't put down any white ink because then my markers won't absorb into the paper. So you just have to have a steady hand, and I work pretty slow. You're seeing me real time here. This is how I ink. It's a slow process. I mean, some people might be fast, and I think if you're using a brush pen or something where you just add the thickness as you go, it's a lot faster than this, but I just don't have the steady hand for a brush pen, and as I mentioned, mine are a little wonky. So there we go. As you can see, I thickened here, intersection between 2 hair strands, and in general, my lines are thicker on the underside of the hair than they are on the top of the hair. So let's go into this little mess here. Right here, there's 2 sections of hair that are coming into each other like this. Therefore, there's going to be a lot of shadows. Look between my fingers. You can see shadows in the cracks. So that's kind of what we're going to be doing here. Also, these lines are a little squiggly too, so I'm going to be smoothing them out as I go. So thicker in the part of the hair, and then thinner as we get away. And as I was inking all these, which took forever by the way, I noticed that I sometimes did it differently. So remember how I mentioned where there's an apex? I tend to ink it a little bit lighter because I'm assuming there's some light coming from above and hitting that. But look at this apex right underneath it. I actually made it a little bit thicker because I was picturing 2 sections of hair coming on top of each other, and one section of hair is casting a bit of a shadow. So sometimes it's a little bit thicker at the apex, sometimes it's thicker not at an apex. Like I said, I have my general rules, but I don't follow them 100%. I think I'll fast forward through the rest of the hair because it is pretty straightforward, and then I'll come back when I move on to the next section of the picture. Just another note about the hair. One thing I sometimes do when I have a long straight section like this is I thicken both ends, and then I actually thicken a little bit in between here because the hair kind of dips down, and I don't want that little tiny squiggly line throughout the whole strand. I want to give it some thickness at the base and then it tapers, and then I give it a bit of thickness in the middle as well. Just helps give that line a bit more dimension and kind of implies that the hair is splitting slightly there. And then as we come down to the bottom, I would then thicken it again. Prime example of where I'm making the line thicker than I wanted to, but it's because I didn't have a steady hand and my lines were getting too scratchy and not smooth. So I just do my best to cover up my mistakes, and if someone was watching this in a speed painting video, they probably wouldn't even know that that was a mistake, but I know it's a mistake and I just try to make it look like it's not one. Okay, so we've got the hair done. That was the bulk of it. For the actual face, there's not much to do. You don't really need much for line weight on the eyes. I mean, there's the eyelashes themselves, but I already inked those thicker because they just, it's not really line weight. That's just me coloring in the object in a way. It's kind of like if I didn't leave the eyebrows white here, if I just colored it in when I was inking. But since I didn't color them in, I am going to add some line weight to the eyebrows. And I'm just adding a bit of weight to the underside, and I would try to give more weight to the inside than to the outside, just because the eyebrow itself is tapering, so I tend to taper off the thickness of the line as well. And we'll do the same on this side. And that's it for the eyes. For the nose, I'm going to thicken the underside. My instinct is to turn the paper, but I feel bad for you guys if the paper's all twisted and upside down all the time. So the nose itself is going to cast a shadow on the lips, so I'm going to thicken the line on the underside of the nose, taper it off as we go up the nose, and then also this line could use a bit of thickness at the bottom. There we go. I don't really want to add any thickness to this middle line. You can, if I was going to add thickness, it would be right in the middle of it, but I don't want that line to be too noticeable for the bridge of the nose, so I'm just going to leave it as it is. For the lips, I tend to thicken this middle part here, and then the middle here, because the upper lip would cast a shadow on the bottom lip, and it's just a little bit thickest where the point is, and then same thing down here, middle of the lip, because that's where the puffiness of the lip casts a shadow. That's it for the face. We already got the neck. And then for the rest of her outfit, it's pretty much the same as we've been doing this whole time. Actually, I didn't do her ear, so let me just do that. And I'm sorry if you can hear my chair squeaking occasionally. It's gotten really squeaky lately, and I think I need to tighten some screws. Like that. Can you hear that? I'll try to not move my butt too much. Although we're kind of getting to the end of the video anyways, so hopefully I wasn't wiggling around too much. So for the ear, it's thinnest where the outside is, or I like to think of it as an apex even though it's smooth. And then the underside is the darkest part. So same things apply to say this bow. Undersides are gonna get darker lines, T-intersections are gonna get a little thicker, and then I'm not gonna add too much thickness to these lines here because it's really just a detail that doesn't need to be emphasized. I want it to look like a nice, smooth, crinkly fabric. And you could, if I was gonna add line thickness, I would add it on this inner edge and taper it as I get outwards, because the neck's coming in like this, the shoulder's coming in like this, so the shadows would be in the middle here. So that's where I would add the thickest lines and taper it off as I go out. But I don't think I'm gonna do that. I am, however, gonna thicken the bottom of this ribbon here. And I usually do go over my lines everywhere, but I just don't always thicken them a ton. Like, you might think, oh, why'd you just thicken the top of that? Well, I wasn't really trying to thicken it, I was just trying to make it a little bit nicer. A little more bold. And once again, the silhouette is going to be a little bit thicker than the internal lines. So once again, I'll fast forward through this part because really it's all just the same technique over and over again, and then I'll show you the finished product. Alright, so here's the final picture with line weight, and then here we have a picture without any line weight, and it doesn't look as good. This has much more dimension and life to it. So yeah, I hope this tutorial was helpful for you guys. If you have any suggestions for other tutorials, leave a comment below, but please be specific. Don't just say anatomy, you know, specify a certain body part if you want something in particular. And if you haven't subscribed already, please do. You'll get notifications whenever I post a new video. So yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in my next video.